Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Bain-Selbo. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Values in Higher Education. You can tell that by the banner behind me. And I am broadcasting to you today from the SVHE studios in beautiful downtown Kokomo, Indiana. And I appreciate you joining us today. The Society for Values in Higher Education is a nearly 100-year-old organization concerned with thinking intentionally about particularly the ethical values that surround higher education and that are part of the mission of our work in the classroom, in the laboratories, and the studios. And this coming year, 2021, we are hoping to be back in person with our annual summer meeting. And we were going to meet in Indianapolis last year, and of course we couldn't. We ended up with a virtual meeting. We are going to try to return to Indianapolis this year at Indiana University, Purdue University in downtown Indianapolis. The theme of this year's meeting is Can We Talk? The university's role in transforming public discourse. And so you can find that information on our website at svhe.org. I would also encourage you to check out the journal of the Society for Values in Higher Education called Soundings. It is I'm just going to say it, it is the premier interdisciplinary journal in higher education. And it's been around for a very long time. Next year will be volume 104. And so it is a sort of a treasure of the Academy. Today, on this version of Chats with Change Agents, we have the great opportunity to talk with Kathleen Fitzpatrick. She is Director of Digital Humanities and Professor of English at Michigan State University. She has an incredibly impressive background in scholarly communications work, which is sort of comes up in an important way in the book that we're going to talk about today. She is the author of Planned Obsolescence, Publishing Technology and the Future of the Academy. But we're going to focus our attention today on this book, Generous Thinking, a radical approach to saving the university. So I was attracted to the title by both the use of the word radical and saving the university. And so I'm just delighted that she agreed to join us today. We will have a sort of general conversation about sort of the key elements of the book. And while we are doing that, feel free to use the chat function to share any thoughts you'd like to communicate to other people who are attending. But please use the Q&A function if you'd like to ask a question directly to Kathleen. So I've got the Q&A box pulled up, and periodically I'll keep an eye on that and be sure to ask questions when we get to them. So we'll get started. Oh, the other thing, just so people know, we do keep these strictly to an hour. So we will wrap up right at 3 o'clock. So that I assume everybody listening to me right now probably has some other pressing issue that they need to address. So Kathleen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to get to have this conversation with you.
And the last thing, and then I really will get to get us started. We are recording this, and so on the SVHE website, if you'd like to go back and watch it again, but you can also refer friends to it, and we should be able to have it up and available within a week or so. So I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about what led you to write the book. Like what was it that sort of drove you to take on this topic? And we'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question to begin with. I periodically have these moments where I go back and attempt to reconstruct, like, what was it that got me started thinking down this path? And I think there were a number of different entry points, and a number of different points at which the ideas behind this book started sort of surfacing for me. But one of the key ones, I think, was during the time when I was working at the Modern Language Association. I was director of scholarly communication and associate executive director there. And there was some, professional conflict that was taking place around something. And I don't remember what it was, but I remember that it was highly charged and that people were bringing their thickest professional vocabularies to the conflict in the ways that they were arguing with one another about this point. And I remember watching this take place and thinking, this kind of conflict gets misunderstood, I think, from the outside of the profession, in large part because so much of the work that we, and particularly in the humanities, the work that we do sort of advances through argument and conflict, and we disagree with one another and we rumble around the ideas, and then we sort of synthesize things into better ideas as we move forward. But just watching the conflict part happen looks really unpleasant and really like, if these people can't agree with each other, why should we be paying any attention to what's going on with them? And it
And
occurred.
sometimes it just is unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
it really is. I've been in department meetings.
right.
Right. It has those moments of just intractability and pointlessness. But even when the conflicts really matter, when they're very serious, and when they're about issues that we all ought to care about, they make a lot of what we do seem really uninviting from the outside, and to seem embittered and closed off. And it started occurring to me that maybe some of the issues that we as a profession were having in trying to convey to the broader public, like what the humanities is for, what it's good for, what the good of higher education is, and particularly what the public good of higher education is, that some of the ways that we talk to one another, some of the conflicts that we bring to the table might be interfering in presenting to that public what our best selves are and what we really feel the value and the good of the profession is and should be. And so it sort of started from there. And I thought, what if we attempted to model better ways of engaging with one another, better ways of thinking together rather than thinking against each other all the time, and instead, found ways to maybe model for the broader culture what disagreement that doesn't devolve into a shouting match might look like. And generous thinking came from that. So
Yeah, and in fact, that's a great segue to the very idea of generous thinking. And so, and I think you've gotten at a little bit of this. I was hoping for those who haven't had a chance to read the book, I encourage people to go do that. Could you just say a little bit about what you mean by generous thinking? And I think you've already hinted at how it may change the way that we encounter our colleagues.
yeah.
But I was particularly, moved by your descriptions of how it could change the classroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so for me, generous thinking, I mean, there has been the suggestion in some of the responses to the book that I am opposing generous thinking to critical thinking, right? That I just want us all to be nice and to accept one another's ideas and pretend like everything is fine. And that is not the case at all. I am a strong believer in the power of critical thinking to really do the work to advance the kinds of issues, particularly around social justice, that we need work on in this culture right now. But I think we have come to mistake in some ways critical thinking, that thinking that can help us advance, for a kind of competitive thinking, right?
Mm.
In which my ideas have to win. I have to be better at this than anybody else. And a lot of that, I believe, stems from, first of all, the individualist, competitive, market-oriented culture in which we are all steeped, right? That we are inescapably part of in the contemporary United States. But also the ways that individual distinction is conferred upon us within the university system, right? If your idea is seen to vanquish the ideas that have gone before you, this is a triumph in scholarly senses, right? If you as an individual publish something that is lauded, out of control, and everybody recognizes the brilliance of, you might get grants and course releases and things that let you out of the communal part of your job and into more individually, that let you reserve your time for your own individual pursuits. And because of this, because our rewards come in individualistic, individualized forms, and because they come from competition in some sense, we're always trying to, it's like you put yourself back in that seminar room from graduate school, in which you have to make your mark by demonstrating that you have the smartest idea in the room. And that pressure carries through our entire careers. And as you say, if we move into a more generous mode in which we're not thinking against each other, but with one another, if we recognize that everyone in that seminar room is building on one another's ideas and is collectively smarter than any one of us individually can be, we might begin to develop a bit more generosity in the ways that we deal with one another as colleagues.
Mhm. Well, oh, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say that, and as you say, we can bring this into the classroom, and
Right.
we do bring this into the classroom, which is, I think, part of the crucial, like the thing that we miss a lot of the time is that the kinds of work that I'm talking about, building on ideas that are presented, even when those ideas are imperfect, and drawing out better from one another to do something collective, we all do that in the classroom all the time. Right. And so thinking about how we can bring that same energy to our engagements with our colleagues and to our engagements with the broader public, I think is really crucial.
Well, and it struck me in reading some of those passages where you're talking about the classroom, that I know that those times when I've been in the classroom and I felt sort of, well, like, and we're going to come back to this idea about community, right? Where I most felt like I was part of a community that included the students is when we're sitting there and I feel like we're all trying to seek understanding together, as opposed to them looking at me as, oh, well, you're the expert, tell us what the right answer is, right? And and I think I think what you recommend and what we're talking about, right, is something that can be done across all disciplines, even if maybe literature, for example, may be particularly suited to it, right?
Mhm.
Or philosophy and religious studies, which is my background, right? I mean, those kind of lend themselves to that a little bit, but I would imagine you can do this in any classroom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's recognizing that the kinds of questions that get asked in the classroom are often the start at thinking about something differently, right? And to really sort of, how to put this? One of the things that's been helpful for me has been recognizing that in almost all of my teaching engagements, I find myself learning more than I convey in the way of knowledge, right? And I learn more because the questions that my students have, or the interpretations that they present, or the ideas that they want to explore, force me to think differently about the material. And in that thinking differently, I end up in a new place. So, yes, in the math classroom, in the chemistry classroom, there are more and less correct answers to things. There are more and less correct answers in the literature classroom too. There are some
Sure.
interpretations that just don't hold water. But being asked to think through why is this interpretation not as good as this other one?
Mhm.
Why is this other one stronger? Actually asks me to really pay attention to what my students are thinking and why they're thinking that, and to um, help them think as broadly as they can.
Right. I wanted to pick up on, you mentioned the sort of academic culture of critique and competition, and that's a really dominant theme through the text. And it was interesting, you mentioned the kind of reward structure we have, right? Where often the
Mhm.
rewards for faculty, maybe particularly in the humanities, but probably also in the social sciences. You know, we think of people on the science side, right, who often get grants, and that drives them into the lab where they have lots of collaborators and you know, students working with them, graduates or undergraduates. But a lot of our reward structures really are rewards for individuals that, as you said, take them away from the collective work that we're all doing on campuses. Is there, um, how would you imagine that institutions should start rethinking, or should they start rethinking their promotion and tenure documents? And what do you
Yes.
see as like, hey, here's some places that we really need to take a step back and sort of rethink what these documents are doing? Seems to me to be part of what you're arguing.
Absolutely, and I think it's really crucial that this happen if we want our institutions to survive as collectives. Because the work that we do, I mean, it's the reason why institutions of higher education have long had principles around shared governance, sometimes better enacted than others, right? But that shared governance indicates that everyone who is teaching within the institution should have a stake in the functioning of the institution and should really be part of its larger structural workings, rather than just showing up to your job and teaching in the classroom and then going home, right? Without that stake in the institution, we lose our collective understanding of what the institution is for. And one of the first things that happens when you start becoming successful as a scholar or as a teacher is, you know, getting excused from certain kinds of service, right? Well, the faculty don't have time for that. You should stay in the lab and you should write your book and you should do the things that will bring the university rewards, the
Mhm.
things that will increase its rankings, frequently take faculty out of the business of helping to run the university itself, doing the thing that we call service, right? And so there are key things that I think need to happen in rethinking our reward structures, and particularly the reward structures that exist around promotion and tenure.
Mhm.
One of them is that we need to think about the thing that we call research in the most flexible, generous possible ways that we can, right? So, you know, as you say, scientists go into the lab and they've got tons of collaborators. But there are also really bitter hierarchies that get enacted within the science lab. You know, who's got first authorship on the article and why? Who is primary investigator on the grant? Like all of that matters in the hierarchy of who gets rewarded for doing the kinds of work that get done. We need to have a much broader and more capacious sense of what it is to be rewarded for the work and what the work is, right? So that everybody who's participating in a project receives the benefits of having done that work. And I think that, you know, this extends into the social sciences and the humanities in terms of thinking about how we reward collaboration. Right
Mhm.
now, in fact, in many of our fields, collaboration is actually a detriment. I had a colleague a million years ago at Pomona College who was going up for promotion with a co-authored book. And my colleagues wanted to know which parts she had written
Oh,
and
wow.
wanted her to write. And I mean, if you've co-authored anything, you know that at a certain point, you've written all of it, and so has your co-author, right? There is no easy separation. And in fact, co-authoring a book probably takes twice as long.
I was going to say, it often is more work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So really recognizing the labor that goes into it, but also the value of working with another person and bringing two minds to bear on a project, rewarding that appropriately, needs to happen. Beyond that, I think we really need to get ourselves out of that tripartite research teaching service mode of breaking down our work. Because as we all know, in the vast majority of institutions, I mean, this is not true of many small liberal arts colleges or of community colleges, but at a whole lot of other institutions, service is a distant third in that tripartite schema, with the result that faculty who, particularly at the associate professor level, get brought into what should properly be thought of as academic leadership positions, whether it's, running a department or a program or what have you, becoming an associate dean, all of the things that one does, those end up detracting from the ability to do the research, which is number one. And therefore it comes to be this conflict between, should I do this thing that's good for the institution, or should I focus on myself and get myself promoted, which is a terrible place to be. So I really think that we need to think differently about what it is that we as scholars do and why, and find ways to assess and reward the real goals of becoming an intellectual leader and contributing to a well-functioning institution, rather than getting caught in the particulars of how many single-authored peer-reviewed journal articles did you publish last year.
Yeah, it's interesting that this discussion about service, as I was telling you earlier, in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at IU Kokomo, the chairs and I have been reading your book, and that part about service came up and really sparked reaction. And I suspect Indiana University is not unique at all in this. And like a lot of universities, when folks go up for tenure or promotion, you have to have an area of excellence. Mm-hmm. But it's either teaching or it's research and creative activity. Mm-hmm. You are strongly, we actually don't specifically say you can't go up in service, but we do everything but say that. All right. Mm-hmm. Like, you're just strongly encouraged, like service is not. And I think you make a really passionate argument for, look, service is that thing that we do as a community, by and large. I mean, service almost always involves people working with one another. It rarely is that sort of, occasionally it can be, but it's rarely lock yourself in your office and sit and work on your computer.
Absolutely.
And that seems, the service piece seems to be that critical piece, as you lay out, right, to building the kind of communities that are vibrant, that where we I think of something like Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, right? I mean, this is where we develop the social capital, because we work together and we get to know one another and we know who we can turn to when we need help with this or that. Right. And that's not an individual activity. That really is a community activity.
Absolutely. And I mean, I imagine that, talking to the Society for Values in Higher Education, I am preaching to the choir here, but that kind of work in community building and in program building and so forth is vitally important intellectual labor, right? It's not just bringing the coffee to the meeting, right? It's really thinking seriously about what's going to produce a program that's going to draw in students and engage them and give them the knowledge that they need to be strong, committed citizens. And it's really thinking, in serious ways about how the structure of an institution, whether it's at the departmental level or at the college level, can best engage the members of that unit in producing the kinds of knowledge and work that the institution wants to commit itself to. And so the more that we shy away from service as something from which people need to be protected, as something that you need to get yourself out of so that you can focus on your own work, I mean, we do that to our great detriment.
Well, and I was thinking about I kind of have to go back and look at our promotion and tenure document now to see what we say about it. But I certainly have experienced the same thing that you raised in terms of co-authored work, collaborative work, right? That the struggle is always, oh, well, how can I get full credit for this? Or do I get full credit for this? And you could see an institution taking the exact opposite approach and to say, hey, look, we actually find collaborative work to be better because people are bringing their various expertise and they are constantly engaged in a peer review process with one another as they write the article or the book.
Exactly.
And we're going to celebrate this instead. Like you're going to get, I don't know how much more credit. I don't know, 15 points extra credit. I don't know what the extra credit is, right? But we're gonna celebrate this and give you more credit as opposed to making it a constant obstacle to overcome.
I think that's brilliant. And I would add to that, we need to do that on the teaching level too. The obstacles to cross-listing courses or to team teaching, God forbid, courses are astronomical in a lot of institutions. And particularly in a moment of, responsibility-centered budgeting, right? Where, the students in that class can only be credited to one department, not another. And therefore you need to hoard your students, greedily and keep them from taking classes elsewhere. When in fact, team taught courses, I mean, sure, make everybody have twice as many students in a class that's got 2 full-time faculty members teaching it, but have every class have 2 full-time faculty members teaching it, because bringing 2 minds together in that room with this collection of students can produce the most amazing conversations. And that we're letting structural difficulties and budgetary difficulties keep us from having those incredible, often, radically interdisciplinary exchanges is just a shame.
Well, and I've had the good fortune to have opportunities to team teach over the years. And I would, some of my fondest memories in the classroom are team teaching with colleagues. And it's not just that it was personally fun, because it's always great to, in some ways, you have a wonderful opportunity to sort of model the kind of what I think was generous thinking and academic discourse with my colleagues. We weren't trying to one up one another by any means. And you get to model that, but the feedback that I've consistently got from students is how much they appreciate that experience. And, so the one of the we've been focusing kind of on communities internal to the institution. But one of the big issues that you talk about in the book is the divide between institutions of higher education and the communities in which they exist. And so I wonder if you could say something about that divide and what you see as, what are the sources of that? Why do we have such a disconnect?
Yeah, so many reasons, unfortunately. Where to begin? We've seen recent polls and surveys that have been released in the last few years that have demonstrated that there's been a really radical decline in the public perception of the value of higher education, and particularly in public perception of the good that institutions of higher education provide to the society. And, some of that is easily attributable to the current political moment in which we live, in which there is just such deep conflict, in which folks on one side of the aisle are saying that, the pointy-headed professors on campus are indoctrinating your kids, and that they need to be stopped, right? That there's a way in which it's become politically useful to paint the academy as the enemy, and therefore kind of foster a deeper divide between liberal intellectuals and the rest of the public. But there are also ways in which, I mean, first of all, that project dates back to the 1970s, for sure. And I'm thinking of the moment post 1968, while Ronald Reagan is governor of California, that it became clear to that particular establishment that students on campus were interfering with what was perceived to be the orderly relationship between the academy and corporate research and corporate funding that the academy was there ostensibly to foster. And so there was a decision made at some point in that whole mix, mostly in California again, that what had previously been state-funded higher education, extraordinarily low cost, provided to a very wide range of students, should not be free anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Should, through tuition and fees, displace the cost of providing that education from the state to students and families, because students who are paying for this education might value it more and might find themselves a little less prone to be in the street protesting, right? So they'll be a little less inconvenient to us all if they're being charged for the time that they're at this institution. It also conveniently provides a way of from that perspective, keeping some undesirable elements out of the university. This is a moment in 1968 at which the university is being called to account for its whiteness and for its middle classness and for its lack of support for the communities that are immediately outside the walls of the institution. And student protests at this moment, I mean, this is Roderick Ferguson's argument, right? Students at this moment are protesting to insist that the university look more like the world around it, and that it begin to serve the entirety of the population rather than simply serving the white middle class. That does not come to pass, right? Certain ways diversity within the institution does increase in ensuing years, but at a great cost to a whole lot of folks. So we find now, that as state budgets and federal budgets to support higher education have been in radical decline, institutions have had to make up the shortfall through increasing tuition and fees, leaving students and their families with astronomical debt loads that are utterly untenable. And because of that, families and students are well within reason to ask, what is this for? What are we paying for this for? What we're supposed to be paying for, as they come to understand it, is a credential that's going to provide my child with a really good life, right? A good income and a good job. And because of that turn toward higher education as a form of pecuniary exchange, right? I provide you money, you provide me a credential, I get this job in which I will earn more money than I would otherwise. Because that has become the focus of higher education, we find ourselves in a world in which what was higher education for hundreds of years, right? The liberal arts, really understanding philosophy and history and literature and art and music and so forth, is now seen as extraneous. And what we need to be focusing our students' energies on is career path training. Right. And therefore, the majors that are named after particular professions do well. And the ones that are soft, they seem extraneous, are suffering in this environment. And so, I mean, all of this goes to say that there are deep economic and political roots to the purposeful changes that have been made both around and within the academy. That have left the humanities struggling, that have left students and families with astronomical debt loads, and that have left a lot of the public looking at us, particularly in fields like the humanities, saying, like, what is it you guys do there and why do you do it? You're filling my students' head with all of these ideas. They come home at Christmas and they talk to me about things that I don't understand. And like, I'm not sure that this whole thing was a good idea. So I've been going on, but the thing that's up underneath generous thinking all the way through is this idea that the public will never understand and care about what it is we do on campus or why we do it on campus if we keep it closed in amongst ourselves, right? If I only talk with other colleagues of mine and other colleagues around the nation about the kinds of work that I do on campus, about the concerns that I have for literature and media studies and so forth, it's no wonder that nobody cares about what literature professors write about, because it's not out there in a way that allows people to engage with it and to say, like, oh, I see the significance, I see the importance of what it is that you're doing. So like rebuilding those relationships with the public and helping them see why we work the ways we do, why the institution is structured the way that it is, and what the good that we're trying to promote is, is I think the thing that'll help us.
Yeah, it's interesting that you know, my guess is that in the 1950s or 60s or 70s, you know, parents who you know, didn't have a college degree, whose kids were going off to college, um, they may not have had any more appreciation for the study of literature than parents today. But this is the you know, the really interesting point here. One interesting point about what you were saying is um, in I don't know, 1960, they weren't investing tons of money in it, right? Like, you know, sure, go off to college, you're going to get a degree, become a white collar worker, you know, good for you, son, daughter. And I assume all that stuff that they're going to teach you is good for you. And so go do that, right? And you could just sort of, you know, a parent could just sort of say that. But when you are spending tens of thousands of dollars, or your child is going tens of thousands of dollars in debt, then you start asking that, you know, and I think you're completely right. It is perfectly reasonable for somebody to ask that question. Nobody can spend tens of thousands of dollars and not know what they're getting or what their child is getting. And so they're asking that question now because the economics of it has driven them to that question in a way in which, you know, you think about the greatness of, I mean, the California system still great, but you know, that vision that they had of educating the population, you know, through the UC system and then through the Cal State system, you know, was, you know, almost, you know, today almost we look backwards to see it as almost a utopian vision.
Yeah,
they had actually pulled it off, right?
Yeah.
And I know that there's I think you cite him in your book too, Christopher Newfield's work, you know, in The Great Mistake, and he sort of lays out like this terrible economic story. And I think his background's in English.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. And but he just got kind of onto those economic issues. So much of the sort of structural changes in how we fund higher education have very much contributed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not for nothing, as Chris Newfield would say, that the privatization of higher education is not just about its funding model. I mean, right, that's at the core of it, and that drives all of these other issues. But in the process of privatizing the funding model for higher education, we've made education come to seem like a private responsibility rather than a public good. And it's only in making that change and really getting back to the understanding that education should be a public good, that we're really going to be able to flip the switch. So
yeah. So we talked a little bit earlier, and I'm just reminding people, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on that. We talked earlier about some of the things, like promotion, tenure documents, sort of structural changes to, encourage that community building, that solidarity. I really appreciate the use of these heavily value-laden terms that you use. I think when thinking about higher education, we often don't use them enough.
yeah.
But what about that? What about this divide between the university and the communities in which they exist, right? Like what sort of structural changes should academics be thinking about in order to address some of that?
Um, I, I think that's exactly the place where we need to be placing more thinking, is in that sort of relationship between the work that we do on campus and the publics that we really want to understand and be involved in the kinds of work that we're doing. There is an entire literature in community engaged research. There's a ton of stuff out there. I am no expert in community engaged research, but I will say from the research that I have done, that one of the ways in which our institutions tend to make a mistake in reaching out to the publics that surround them has been in thinking about the university as a source of resources, right? And the public as an audience in need. And therefore approaching folks off campus, communities of varying kinds, and saying, we're the university and we're here to help. Which is an enormous problem, in no small part because we often don't understand what it is those communities are driven by, what it is they want, where their needs lie. In fact, they understand those things way more than we do. So really approaching our engagements with the communities that we want to work with as two-way, right? As us learning from them as much as they might learn from us, is absolutely crucial. And so, this happens a lot of times. There are summer service learning projects that take place in inner cities where university students will go work with kids in schools, or university students will go work with other kinds of institutions within our major metropolitan areas, and sort of parachute in for a very brief period of time rather than building a long-standing kind of partnership. And those partnerships, I think, are absolutely crucial to really helping the engagement of our faculty and students off campus become serious and become a real learning moment, but also to actually doing things in the community that matter and that can be sustained over a longer period of time. So, one of the examples that I refer to in the book, and one that I come back to a lot when I think about what the ideal for me of genuine community engagement might look like on campus, is a project that was run by the Drescher Center for the Humanities at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. It was a project called Baltimore Stories. And, humanities centers, the things they typically do, you bring together some scholars to do work together in collaborative ways. You have some fellowships that bring in either folks from the outside or that give faculty on campus time to do their writing. And then you have lecture series, right? And you bring in experts who are in a series, usually talking about something that's all tied together and presenting like the state-of-the-art research on this. You can imagine in a city like Baltimore, what a disaster it could have been had the Drescher Center for the Humanities decided we are going to create a community engaged project on the future, the present and future of race in America. And we're going to bring in experts, and they're going to talk about the issues that are happening in our inner cities with respect to race. And we're going to bring together community members to come have this conversation with us. What they decided to do instead, rather than bringing in experts and hand the community knowledge about race, was to say the knowledge about race is in this community. And we want to bring together members of the community. We want artists, we want organizers, we want teachers, we want everyone to come have a series of conversations that we can convene and support, and that will allow this institution to learn from your experience rather than the usual transmission of information from the institution to the community. And it was a phenomenally successful series of events. And that for me has become my ideal of how the university ought to use its resources and its convening power to learn from the world around it, and to say, you know, whatever the issue is in your area, bring people who really know that issue together to come talk and to think through what solutions there might be.
Well, and it reminds me, that's a great example. And I think we, Kokomo is probably a little more diverse than a lot of people think. And we probably have a great opportunity to do something like that here, right? But as academics, our gut reaction is to, you know, hey, let's find somebody who's written a good book, and we'll bring them in and we'll have them talk and you know, give us knowledge.
Yes.
And it also reminds me of the work. I don't know if you know Harry Boyd's work. He's a longtime community organizer. Has worked a lot with the American Democracy Project.
Okay.
To ask you, and you know, he in sort of the last couple of decades, he's written a lot on higher education and the relationship with the communities. And you know, and of course, he takes a community organizing approach to it, which means that you don't begin as the expert walking into the community to share the knowledge that you have. You walk in as a learner to collaborate and work with the, you know, and you know, if you need to build a bridge across the river, you need a civil engineer, right? But in thinking about the best places to put that bridge and the impacts on communities and what would be there is that knowledge in the community that they know that,
Yes.
right? They don't need somebody to come tell them that.
Right. Absolutely. That's really great. Thank you for introducing me to his book, his work. I'll look forward to following up on that.
Well, and it doesn't surprise me. The University of Maryland, Baltimore County has a long and rich ongoing tradition of work in the community.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they've really been leaders in this.
They have been indeed. They have been indeed.
A couple of I wanted to read a passage and then ask a question. And so this is from page 131 at the bottom of the page, the end of the chapter on reading together. I was really we've made little steps in trying some of this through Zoom this semester, where we've opened some classrooms up to try to bring in members of our own community, but also members of maybe the alumni community, or they've just been open, right?
Cool.
And you know, we're going to keep working at it. So you write, for scholars to begin to forge connections with those readers, we must be willing to demonstrate our love for our work, to open our reading processes to others, to invite them into open exchange with us, to engage them directly in the hows and whys of our approaches to our fields. Creating an environment in which the public might begin to care about our work demands that we do at least some of that work in public. That makes complete sense to me. And my question is going to come across the wrong way. But you were careful, because you said creating an environment in which the public might begin to care about our work. I think for a lot of academics, they just assume that the public doesn't care, right? And some might even think, well, it's kind of elitist to think that they even should care or they want to care, right?
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about that? Because I think that's a really thorny issue
Yeah.
that is kind of a cult, it's very much a cultural divide, right? That even though as academics we live in the communities where our institutions are most of the time, or we all live in community, and there's this cultural distance in some way. And so, how would you respond to the person who says, you know, the public just doesn't care about my reading of this novel, and they
Yeah.
probably don't even care about reading this novel, and so I don't even know where I'm supposed to begin.
So the first question that I would want to ask in that kind of conversation would be when you say that the public doesn't care
Hmm.
about your reading of the novel or about reading that novel,
Mhm.
who is that public? And how are we constructing our ideas about that public and who they are? Because I think there are a lot of people out there that probably do care about reading that novel.
Sure.
And some subset of them might care about your argument about the novel too. You don't know until you find them. And I make this argument in part because of an experience that I had. So my original work back in the day in grad school was on sort of what was then contemporary American fiction. It's now late 20th century American fiction. But I was really focused on the work of writers like Pynchon and DeLillo and the ways that they were engaging with the contemporary media space and
Okay.
thinking about the role of the novel in that media space. And so in grad school, I found myself on this listserv. This is, the mid 90s. So there were like the most of the work online was happening via listservs. It was a listserv that was focused on Pynchon. And it had been around for quite some time. And it was, hundreds of folks who were just completely obsessed with Pynchon, who would every so often have this giant group read of Gravity's Rainbow and kind of work carefully through the text and follow up on connections and allusions throughout it, and who really engaged with the scholarship around Gravity's Rainbow too.
Sure.
Some percentage of the folks on this listserv were academics or sort of academic adjacent, but the vast majority of them were not. They were everywhere. They were doing all kinds of different work. And the folks on this list, I found really thoughtful readers of incredibly difficult work who wanted to talk about it in serious ways. The Pynchon list ended up spawning a David Foster Wallace list. There was, of course, rivalry between them. You Wallace people, take your work elsewhere. We don't want to hear about it. But the Wallace list was the same. And the folks on the Wallace list, again, many of them graduate students and undergrads and other, faculty members, but a lot of them not, really helped in certain ways push my thinking about these writers forward. And when I was working on, I moved from these listservs into early blogging and had a whole bunch of folks from, a wide range of backgrounds commenting on things that I was writing on the blog. When I went to publish Planned Obsolescence, my second book, and decided to put it through an open peer review process online. We posted the entire draft manuscript for really close comment, and I had, 40 some odd readers who left really serious comments for me to think through. I did this in part because I knew that, yes, they could send this manuscript to 2 or 3 experts and get really close, deep readings of it that would help me think about revising from a particular point of view. But I had been working through the listservs and the blog with this much wider range of readers, and I wanted them to help me press the ideas in the book forward. So there was a guy who had been on the Wallace listserv for a very long time, who is an attorney in Indiana, as it turns out, who ended up coming into the chapter on intellectual property and planned obsolescence, and really helping me press that thinking forward in some ways that were really significant. So, all of this is to say, it's a very long-winded way of saying, for any interest we have on campus, I absolutely believe that there are 100 people out there who are not academics, who have that same interest, and who would love to engage in discussion around whatever it might be. Some audiences are bigger. You look at the Jane Austen folks and their popular engagement with readers who just adored Jane Austen. There are thousands upon thousands of them, right? Wallace has a whole lot of fans. You get into more niche areas within the curriculum, and perhaps those audiences get smaller, but I don't think they disappear. And I think that the more that we can do to engage with readers who really do care about what we do, the better off the work will be.
Well, and with the technology, and especially now that people are more comfortable with your community. I mean, I think a lot of your focus in the book, and sort of the way I have thought about it too, is often, okay, like literally Kokomo, Indiana. And I think that's an important community to try to figure out that relationship.
Sure,
too, right?
absolutely.
Know that relationship. But with the technology and how much more comfortable we are with it today, the community of people who may be interested in a specific author or a specific book even, or a specific religious tradition or philosophical tradition, that your community could actually be anywhere in the world. And you could be bringing them together. I wanted to finish up before we let you go.
Okay.
So at a number of points, you're talking about the transformation of the institution, and the book really sort of concludes with a call to action, right? That we really need to get to work on these things. And we've talked in this conversation about, some of the places we may start, like promotion tenure documents and taking our work into the public and those sorts of things. For the group here now, and I will say there's a really exciting ongoing discussion going on in chat.
Awesome.
And we'll save that, and so be sure to share it with you.
Great, thank you.
What I guess words of advice to academics, who read your book, and you gave us the UMBC example, and you provide others in the book. And so examples are always really good. Like, what are the best practices? What are people doing? But what, words of advice, where do academics start? And two-part question. One is that, and has, since the book's come out and you've had further conversations, have you learned even more, about, where we can go?
Yeah, I absolutely have. I mean, I've been really fortunate to have had the opportunity to visit a whole lot of different campuses, to talk about some of the ideas. I mean, well, before one couldn't visit anywhere, right? I actually did get to travel to other campuses and find out more about the ways that they were thinking about the kinds of strategic work that needed to happen on campus to build deeper and richer forms of community, and to really think about the university as a generous enterprise. I've taken some of the work that happened in those conversations, in those visits, and I've begun thinking about, I've begun working on a follow-up to generous thinking, because one of the key questions that I got in all of those visits was like, okay, this is great. We totally believe that the university needs to become more generous. How do we get started? What do we do? What's the most important way to begin? And so what I'm working on right now, and I've actually been posting a little bit at a time, super early, very, very drafty drafts on my blog. It's at kfits.info, and I would love to have folks come poke at it if they're interested. But it's basically a rethinking of what constitutes leadership on a university campus and why. I mean, we tend to think of leaders as being the senior administrators who have authority over the ways that our institutions work. And one of the things that I'm trying to argue is that each of us on campus has authority or input, at least, over certain kinds of things locally around us. And if we can make, for instance, our department function better,
Mhm.
other departments around us might look at us and go, wow, actually, y'all are getting along really well, and you're drawing in more students, and you're doing all of this really exciting work. Maybe we should do that too.
Mhm.
And so finding ways to treat the local change that we can create as the basis for modeling better ways forward is one way that I would go. The other thing that I would say, and I'll say this quickly because I know it is time, is just that, we tend to think about the documents that govern our work together in our institutions as being immutable, right? Because there's all kinds of process around having to change the bylaws or having to change our tenure and promotion processes and so forth. But there is a process through which those things can get done. And if you can build a group of folks who, like you, really genuinely believe that a document needs to be opened up and revised, it can happen. It's just got to start with somebody willing to take that step. And so, the new book, which is called tentatively Leading Generously, is really focused on, like, how do you become that person who is willing to get that work done?
Right. Well, and I will just say that, I mean, there's a point towards the end of this book where you grant that at some point there has to be administrator buy-in, but this work can be done from the grassroots, right?
Yes.
And academically, we're talking about faculty, and so that's why I think the book is a great read for people who are administrators or people who are faculty, and or people who just want to think about higher education in a different way.
Awesome.
And so I definitely encourage folks to go buy it, read it. And visit. And if I remember correctly, this is what you're doing now, right, is what you did with this book,
Yeah.
right, in terms of sharing it ahead of time, getting feedback, honing the arguments. So I'd encourage people to go to your blog and
Awesome.
help you out, and then help us all out when the book finally comes out.
I really appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you so
So,
much.
Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to those who joined us as well. And again, we will be posting this in hopefully within a week or so. And somebody asked if we could make sure the chat is available, and we will do that as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Take care.